Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 231 here, back in data about World Trigger, chapter number 250, along with chapter number 251. The first chapter is titled The Away Mission Test Part 42, and chapter number 251 is titled Sayoko Shiki. And man, it feels so awesome to be back talking about World Trigger. I have definitely taken a break on this channel discussing this series that, I legitimately love the hell out of. I mean, I wouldn't love the hell out of it if I didn't, just go back and also reread half the series. And by half the series, I mean 25 whole volumes of it. But, I mean, we have got some absolutely amazing chapters to talk about this week. Of course, we have the, 250th chapter of this series. We are, to a milestone that so many manga don't reach. I'm so happy to be able to, be a part of talking about this chapter of World Trigger, just to be able to sit down, turn on my phone, turn on my computer, and just talk about this series that I absolutely love. And again, we're also hey, the Away Mission Test Part 42, along with, guys, we have a whole chapter based on Sayoko Shiki. This wasn't on my bucket list for this year, but I'm, so happy and excited that it is. But, of course, like I just mentioned, I went through and I've actually reread the entire series of World Trigger in about a week. I know that is, absolutely crazy to say, but, yeah, it's sort of what I did. I sort of, at the recording of this video, it's been about 9 days since I sat down. I was you know what? I need sort of a pick-me-up. I haven't been feeling that good about making YouTube content recently, so let me just go reread World Trigger. And I forgot how addicting and amazing this series really is. I sort of just sat down, read it, and was okay, that's pretty fun. Got through that initial arc. Oh, wow, here's what all the triggers are, and that really effortless piece of world building where it's hey, Arashiyama Squad is helping out Jin to not let Miwa Squad and some of the other guys get the whole Yuma's trigger and all of that. It's okay, they're doing all of that stuff in the prologue, and all of your triggers are being explained. It's not a lore dump in 2 chapters. It takes 6 chapters to understand what a scorpion is, and then to get okay, now we're moving on to all of these other different parts in the series, and it's okay, it's really cool. Wow, the second large-scale neighbor invasion, I read that in a day, and it's okay, all of the rank wars just going through, and of course, I also own the entire series of World Trigger physically, and it was really awesome to be able to go through, read all the volume extras, and also sit down and reread the volume extras from about volume 19 to the most current one of 27. There's a little bit of a asterisk on that, because I haven't actually sat down and reread anything past volume number 25 yet, but I also do remember those chapters a whole lot better, because I've been pretty much covering the series since the contents of the 26th volume, so it's 1 or 2 chapters in that volume I didn't actually cover here on the channel, so I actually have a lot of experience in sitting down and actually talking about all of this, and I mean, and as we'll be getting to, it's really fun because in volume number 19, one of Daisuke Ashihara's Q&A, this is actually Q&A part 13, there's a question that says, hey, are there any operators with side effects? And Ashihara writes here, yes, I'm hoping to show that off one of these days. And of course, as we'll be getting to in these 2 chapters, one of these is Sayoko Shiki, who is part of the Away Mission Test here, of course, in Utagawa's Squad 1, and that's half of what one of these chapters is focused on, and it's honestly one of my favorite parts we've gotten from World Trigger in a very long time. So with my whole reread of this series here and all of this other various stuff, sitting down ready to talk about this amazing series, of course, I'm always sat beside my World Trigger Border Briefing Files databook in case I need it, and my copy of World Trigger Volume 24, because, hey, this book, I almost open it up, and it just, goes to the World Trigger characters page, because, hey, I may remember, Ninamiya's name along with Ozma, Amatori, and Ima, but I may not always remember Rin Kagami's name, and so it's always here just to give me that little bump up whenever I need to remember all of these characters' names. But of course, with World Trigger, these are the 2 chapters for April of 2025. These are actually our 2nd and 3rd chapters of the year. I know this video is coming out in June. I'm sorry about that. I am trying to get totally caught back up on this series for whenever we get the next few things, at least in this point in June. It looks like the first test, or the first part of the Away Mission Test is almost over. But of course, hopping into these chapters of World Trigger, we first need to talk about what happened in the last chapter, and most importantly, where the last chapter ended off on. We, of course, got introduced to a brand new character, at least who I called a brand new character, in the form of a person named Ryoji Kiriyama. And I now realize that this is a character who's been foreshadowed in World Trigger for a very long time, being that Of course, after I went back and reread the series, I'm like, okay, they were actually a part of the old border. They were in that picture that, of course, Osamu found in the room whenever he's like, oh, wow, this is Commander Kito's old room in the Tamakoma branch. Wow, this is very interesting. And, of course, we, like, very clearly see the design of Ryoji Kiriyama there. And even in that chapter, Yuri Rindo, who is, of course, one of the members of Tamakoma 2, and, of course, the operator, not one of the members of the Tamakoma branch, who's actually the operator for Tamakoma 1 currently, being that Shiori is now with Tamakoma 2 and all of that various scenario. She even says, like, hey, Ryoji Kiriyama actually went to HQ and he's working over there now, and we just never seen him in the story, and I could have sworn that was a brand new character last time, and I guess I should have actually done my research on who Ryoji Kiriyama was. But of course, he's talking about all the test results and everything with everybody. And the very end of last chapter was Katori going to make food for all of the various members of Suicide Squad 7, and she goes over to the pantry door, and oh boy, look at this. The pantry door won't open. And that's where we actually start off this chapter number 250 of World Trigger, as we cut over to Kodera Squad 6, as we pretty much see Kodera's like, what do you mean the door won't open? Like, what are you talking about? And we see one of the members of his squad here. Of course, I should remember this character's name. Who is it? This is, of course, Okudera from Ozma Squad. He's like, yeah, it's just, like, stuck, and, like, I can't get it open. And Kodera's like, I mean, like, I've actually never done that, but, like, how do we actually open it, right? And Rikota just says, like, hey, it should actually open, it should automatically open with just, like, a touch of the hand, and it also closes as long as, like, there's nobody inside the pantry. And we also see that both Miura and Kitora, of course, the two other members of the squad, are here. And we see that Miura's like, so, do we, like, actually think the door is busted or something? And Kitora just is like, I mean, it's definitely possible, but I'm really, like, not so sure. And as Kodera is going over to check all of these various things out, we see his phone on his desk start to ring, as we see that, of course, Suwa is calling him. And Kodera goes over, picks up the phone, and is like, yeah, hello, like, how's it going? And pretty much Suwa gets very much to the point, like, hey, Kodera, before you ask anything, no, I am not calling you for a favor or anything like that. I'm just, like, wondering if you, like, ran into any trouble. And Kodera just says, like, oh, I see what's going on here. And he's like, you too, I take it. And Suwa pretty much puts two and two together, like, oh, like, I'm guessing you too means it's the same on your end, I guess, right? And Suwa's like, hey, that's all I got, no, message received. It starts to hang up the phone, and Kodera's like, hey, I mean, indeed, just let me know if you learn any more. And I love Suwa's response of, I mean, maybe if I really feel like it, I'll talk to you later. Just, like, clicks the phone and, like, presses the hang up button. And Suwa then, of course, turns to his squad and he's like, alright, guys, this is probably a special assignment or something of, like, the ilk, pretty much. And Kodera's like, huh, like, what are you talking about, right? And he's like, really, like, would this be part of the test? And Suwa just says, like, I mean, if it were just us, like, that'd be a really tough call. But being this is also happening to others like Kodera Squad, I'm sure this is just, like, no rogue incident, pretty much, right? It's like, hey, and plus, real technical difficulties would have prompted the management to actually say something about all of this. And Kodera's like, okay, that's true enough, it does make sense. As Oki just sort of, like, speaks up, just like, so, are you, like, saying that they want us to, like, go through it and, like, just fast without any food on the final day of the exam? And Kodera's like, hey, look, I can't even sleep if I'm hungry. So, like, that's not going to work out whatsoever, right? As Yui just says, like, no, guys, now, hold on. Without proper meals and rest, our Tryon reserves won't be replenished, which will, in the worst case, we'll find ourselves unable to use all of the laptops, which means we won't be able to work on the rest of all of the assignments that we need to get done, right? Egtor's like, yeah, it's just like 4 eyes on the first day. Hey, I actually reread that this morning at the recording of this video. I remember when that happened. Of course, it was honestly pretty nice to be able to go through and reread the beginning of the arc, because it had been a good while since I've done that. I've reread it, I think, 3 times while I've been covering World Trigger, but, like, over time, like, with the slow pace that this series currently releases as, it's one of those things where it's really hard to remember, okay, which ones were universal assignments, which ones are the delegated assignments. Now that I've, like, reread it, the universal assignments are the ones that everybody has to complete a little bit at a time every, like, I think there are 400 questions each, and everybody has to do this on their own. And the delegated assignments are ones that are then split up from that massive, massive pool. And it's sort of like, hey, as many of those you can do, get them done pretty much, right? But Oki then speaks up and just says, like, hey, and honestly, it put us in a not-so-great state for the upcoming Battle Phase 2 that, of course, is coming the 2 days after the sealed environment gets sort of let out. And Kotori just says, like, yeah, that sells it. They must be implying that we have to go and fix this pantry door. And Two's like, hey, I'm actually pretty sure there's, like, a toolbox in the laundry room. Like, I'm gonna go take a look for that real quick. And he sort of, like, goes and walks off. And, like, Osamu and some of the other guys are like, all right, that sounds good. As Stu pretty much goes off and walks to get that. Kotori's like, okay, so if we can't fix that, like, what are we gonna do? Like, start fasting? We see that she looks over towards where Yui is. And Yui pretty much just, like, makes a little comment, like, well, I guess this means that the selection test enters its diet arc, which is like, okay, Yui, I guess that's definitely a take that you can have, pretty much. But Osamu then just sort of, like, goes down, like, starts to, like, move his fingers on his chin, and is like, well, honestly, if worst comes to worst. And we didn't immediately cut over to Kakizaki Squad 3, not really seeing what Osamu says, as we sort of get the implication of what Osamu says, as Taichi just is like, I mean, we can just, like, break it down, right? And we see that currently Kakizaki is, like, kneeling on the ground, trying to pretty much figure out what is going on with the door, and Inukai is, like, standing around too, and just is like, what do you mean, like, just break the door, Taichi? And Taichi just says, like, hey, well, I mean, just think about it. This whole test is a simulation of a mission on a spaceship, and these ships would have an engineer or two along for the general ride. But since nobody's clearly coming to, like, fix our door, maybe we're supposed to assume that all the engineers got wiped out. And Kageyora's like, oh, like, they're just all got, like, dead and dusted, pretty much. And we see the operator, Fujimaru, just is like, whoa, Taiki, like, that's really, really dark to be thinking about, right? And Taichi just says, like, hey, or even if, like, the engineer's not dead or something else could be keeping them from trying to help us, pretty much, right? And being that this ship is powered by all of our individual Tryon, access to food is way more important than respecting the integrity of the measly door in this scenario, pretty much, right? And Fujimaru's like, I mean, I guess it sort of makes sense whenever you sort of go down and put it like that, pretty much. But Inukai just says, like, hey, even though, given the premise here, maybe they're just, like, trying to tell us to fix it, pretty much. And Kageora just says, like, hey, but at least knowing the idea that we can also break down the door is the last resort if we can't fix it, like, it really does make this easier to cope with at the very end of the day. And Kakizaki just says, like, hey, true enough, then, like, I'm going to try to fix the door then, but if I can get done like an hour or so, we'll see if Taichi's idea can really be the plan B, pretty much. And the rest of, like, Kakizaki Squad 3 is just like, okay, like, that actually is, like, a very reasonable thing to, like, sit down here and do. Like, we're gonna try, but if we have to break the door, well, we gotta go down and break the door, pretty much, right? Well, at this point, we cut over to OG's Squad 2, as we see that OG is also kneeling down and investigating the door, and he's like, okay, I think I can probably fix this. And we even see that Ikoma is sort of, like, standing over Oki's shoulder. We also see that Tsuji is there also. And Ikoma's like, hey, are you really confident about that, Oki? And Oki's like, hey, some of the delegate assignments actually involve some similar circuitry, and we've got all of the tools and some spare parts, so, like, why not give it a try? And Tsuji's like, hey, but does the door operate via Tryon? And OG's like, hey, it sort of looks like it does. He's like, hey, give me an hour. If that doesn't work, we can think up another approach. And we see that Tsuji sort of, like, is like, okay then. And I love how Tsuji literally just, like, starts to get up and walk away, as he sort of walks by both Obiyashima and Nirei. And Nirei's like, hey, like, we always end up leaving all this brainy stuff to OG. And Obiyashima is just like, I mean, like, I'm sorry we really can't contribute. Like, I'm sorry about all of that, OG. And but Ikoma's like, hey, no, guys, like, don't feel bad. Like OG said, we're actually better off showcasing our actual talents. As long as we put our hearts into what's best, it should be good enough. And of course, Nere just is like, hey, I mean, it's not like we have much of a choice. And Obiyashima just goes like, yeah, we'll pitch in however we can when the time comes. And of course, in typical fashion, Ikoma then spins around the opposite direction from both Nere and Obiyashima and just says to the camera, hey, and when the combat phase is when I'll prove our mettle, pretty much, right? It's like, hey, I really sure hope it works out that way. Like, I really hope it does. And Obiyashima's just like, hey, Ikoma, like, are you good? Like, why are you turning around and talking? Like, what's wrong with you, right? That's where we end the scene with OG's squad too. Hey, we get a solid 2 pages of them. We then get over to Murakami's squad 10, as we pretty much see all the guys on Murakami's squad sort of dealing with this small problem of the door. Mainly, we see that Murakami himself, and I think that's Kurauchi? Kurauchi. We see they're sort of kneeling down, and Tsutsumi and Kumagai, or Tsutsumi and Hiyami in the background, are also sort of like looking at it along with Kumagai. As Murakami's like, okay, so like the lack of correspondence from management tells me that this is probably something we can fix on our own by ourselves, as we see that Kurauchi is sort of like kneeling down at it. Tsutsumi in the background just is like, hey, agreed. And after like coming this far, I really doubt that the higher ups will just like be trying to ruin the exam here. Like, unless we shouldn't be like basing our decisions solely on what makes sense for the management, pretty much, right? And Hiyami, the operator, just says like, hey, I mean, honestly, you'd expect that if you're like coming at it from like a meta perspective or something like that. Like, hey, the combat phase is still coming up after all, right? And at this point, we actually get a good idea of the wiring structure for all of this various stuff, as Kurauchi is the one who's down on the ground sort of opening up the panel and really messing with it. And it's like, alright, well, it looks like the wiring is like simple enough at a glance. Like, hey, this layout might just be like shown in the assignment somewhere. And we see it's like, yeah, I actually feel like I remember like seeing this circuit diagram somewhere. It's like, okay, like what section was it in, like doing all of this? And we see that Hayami goes off to grab all of the various tools, pretty much, right? And we pretty much also see that Murakami walks out and says like, hey, Tsutsumi and Kumagai, you guys are on dinner duty once we crack open this door. How does that work with you two? And the two of them are like, hey, you bet, pretty much, right? And that's where we end off with the whole idea of, hey, this is what Murakami's squad is doing. We then cut over to Karuma's Squad 5, as we see that Yuba has his cell phone out, and he's pretty much going down and taking a picture of the Trion circuitry before he goes and tears it apart. And I also really love how we just see Osano, who is just like completely looking over Yuba's shoulder as he's doing this. Of course, Osano's got like her straw piece or whatever she's sort of like just chiseling in her mouth constantly there. And she's like, hey, Yuba, like, why are you taking all of these pics, right? And I always love it because we just see, like, he just keeps snapping photos back and forth. Like, he just, like, keeps doing it. It's honestly really, really funny. But Yuba just is like, I mean, I'm taking him because we're about to, like, tinker with this mess. And, like, hey, we want a record of how we fiddled around with it to give the engineers an easier time later on. And Osano's like, oh, like, hey, so thoughtful of you, pretty much. Like, hey, how thorough of you, Yuba. And honestly, I do find this very interesting. Like, he's saying, so we can help the engineers later on. Is sort of just a general background. I have worked with, like, wiring houses and stuff like that before, and it's something I know how to do, but I'll always remember, like, the first time, this was when I was very young, probably, at this point, probably about 12 years ago. I was probably, like, 7 or 8 years old, and I'm sitting down and I'm doing something, and my dad comes over and he's like, hey, I want you to try to take this apart for me, right? And I sort of go take it apart, and he's like, all right, I want you to put it back together now. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to do. He's like, hey, here's a good lesson. And he pretty much, like, taught me the whole lesson of, like, hey, whenever you're going through and taking anything apart, you want to be able to, like, take a picture of it. Just take some snapshot of some kind and be able to also sit down and be like, okay, this is how I put this thing back together after fact. Because, hey, you can take something apart super effortlessly, especially like a water heater or something if you don't really know what you're doing, and you can be like, okay, well, I've got a few different wires here, where do they all hook up to? Granted, a water heater is a pretty bad example, because normally you just have your two 220 hot lines going to it, and you then have a ground there normally, and like the ground's pretty obvious what it is. You hook it up to the ground. The other two don't particularly matter. But on some things, if somebody doesn't really know what they're doing or is not a professional doing that work sort of in a DIY style, it can definitely be an issue where you're sort of flipping through and you're like, oh, I forgot how he did this. So I really love this take, and of course it's by Yuba, who is this person who's very stuck up, and it just really sits down and shows us, oh, this is how Yuba is tackling this, and I really love this effect that we get from it. I really think this is a very interesting moment, and one that, like, Daisuke Ashihara is just really good at writing, right? Well, as Yuba is sort of going around and taking a look at all of this, we see what the other 3 members of our squad are doing. Of course, we see Kodai, Hikari, and Karuma here, as Kodai's like, hey, it looks like Ko and all of his people are having a non-working Trion door too, as pretty much, it's like, yes, he's going around and talking with all of the other members of, like, the other squad, just seeing everything that's going on, pretty much, right? And Karuma just is like, okay, that's, like, actually a really big relief, like, this must be part of the test from the top brass, pretty much, right? And Hikari's like, like, yeah, it sounds pretty likely to me, right? And so Kaori pretty much stands up and goes over to walk over to where Yuba's taking care of all of this. He's like, hey, Yuba, can you repair it? And Yuba's like, yeah, like, it just looks like all the stuff in the reference docs they actually gave us. And like, hey, and if this is just like a pop quiz, well, hey, that's all the more reason for me to repair the hell out of this. And I just like really love his attitude here. As we see that Osama's like, hey, well, make it snappy. We all need to cook dinner and go to bed, right? And Yuba's like, hey, you don't need to tell me twice. And that's sort of where we end off this moment with all of the squads going around and seeing what they are doing, as we sort of cut over to, of course, the monitor rooms, pretty much, right? As we see that both Konami and... oh, Shiori, I don't know why I was blanking on her name for a second there, but we see the two of them are sitting down and taking a look at all of their computers and talking about all of this various stuff there. I also just love how in the background, we see Azumi walking over somewhere. Like, you can clearly tell it's Azumi by his black Tachikawa, like, jacket, pretty much, and, like, just his hairstyle, and, like, I want to see more Azumi. I forgot how cool and how much I absolutely love that guy. I love Azumi. Don't make it misconstrued. I think he's a fun character, right? But we see that, of course, Konami and Shiori are pretty much sitting down here and checking out all this various stuff. And Shiori Usami, I probably should just call her Usami, just sort of is like looking at like, hey, so after reaching day 6, like, it really doesn't even look like anybody's remotely flustered by this at all. And Konami's like, hey, I mean, it also seems very likely that a squad will be having dinner tonight one way or the other. Like, they're going to find a way to make it work, right? And Shiori's like, hey, and it seems like Suicide Squad is seldom just breaking down the door since it's faster at the very end of the day, as we really just get a good look at how all of the teams are sort of like doing all of this. Is like, hey, we have 3 different teams: the team break it down if necessary, and team try to fix it. And we see it in team break it down is Kitazoe Squad 4, Suicide Squad 7, and Wakamura Squad 11. Of course, the whole idea of like, yeah, Suicide it's going to be faster, they can deal with it later. Definitely seems like a Suicide Squad move. And I also find it interesting that this is what Wakamura is sort of dealing with here in the moment. It may be one of those things where it's like, hey, quick judgment decision, we need to catch up on all of this stuff. Like, it could just be like a Wakamura moment in him just trying to get better, you know? And of course, the whole idea of Kitazoe Squad, that seems like a Kitazoe thing if it's ever been brought around to me. I mean, in reality, it seems like maybe somebody like Hana would be like, maybe that's not the best idea, and Kikuchi Hara may be like, dude, I don't want anything to do with this pretty much, but it does sort of make sense. The team break it down if necessary is Utagawa Squad 1, and of course, Kakizaki Squad 3. We saw Kakizaki Squad 3 whole thing, and hey, Utagawa sort of makes sense. I honestly didn't realize that Utagawa was as young as he was. He's actually like only 16, which is a little crazy, but hey, he's doing a good job in A rank in Kazama Squad, you know? And of course, the team try to fix it is all of the rest of the teams. OG Squad 2, Kuruma Squad 3, Kodera Squad 6, Ninomiya Squad 8, Mizukami Squad 9, and Murakami Squad 10. That's what all of them are pretty much deciding on, right? We then see that Katori's like, hey, so even though fixing the door would probably earn them more points, of this again talking about Sua's whole decision there, and we see Katori's like, hey, has Osamu just like simply lost his touch pretty much? But Usami's just like, hey, rather than waste the precious time preparing the door, why not have dinner sooner and leave more hours for overtime on homework pretty much, right? Just like, I really bet that was Osamu's thought process. Yeah, that seems like some thought process Osamu would have, you know what I'm saying? But Shiori then just says like, hey, and like, what about you, Konami? Like, would you buckle down and try to, like, to fix the door? And Konami just is like, yeah, I mean, my best attempt at trying to fix that door would probably make it worse, if anything. And honestly, that may be an outcome of this test that the higher management was looking for, because, of course, most of these characters may have not known how to sort of, like, do all this electronic stuff, but if they're doing their assignments, they're slowly learning, and of course, like how Yuba brought it up, and I think, Hayami brought it up in OG Squad, the whole idea of, like, this looks like something that we already were taking a look at earlier, or, no, that was Kurachi who brought that up. Kurachi and Yuba were like, I think we know how to do this, so why not tackle it that way, right? But that's the whole idea that, like, they pretty much go through there, Konami's whole idea of, like, maybe we're learning slowly, right? And Shuri then just says, like, hey, and out of everyone who's opted to repair the door, the one who comes out ahead are likely Yuba and Arafune, right? As we get a look at how Arafune is doing this also, and we see that she's like, hey, the higher-ups are more likely to reward those who take into account the aftermath of a repair job. As we also see that Arifune is taking a picture of the, the circuitry as, of course, Yuba did, right? And we see that Konami's like, yeah, this definitely seems right up their alley. Like, hey, despite looking awfully knowledgeable about this stuff, Hughes actually opted to try not to fix it, pretty much, right? And True's like, hey, maybe all the tools and components are too different than what he's used to, pretty much, right? And like, hey, he has made more major contributions with the delegated assignments after all. And I just love how we see Konami just being like, hey, also, I can really just imagine the smug look on his face as he's going through and all of this, as I love this moment where Konami just, like, envisions how all of this is pretty much going on, with Yusei being like, yeah, I swear, media technology is just utterly primitive, and, like, on the other hand, it's so much worse. And I love, like, just how on the bottom of this whole thing, it's, like, very translated, like, there's a word bubble in the way, so we can't see everything that Yusei was saying, but just in the bottom corner, we just see the word Canada. I don't know why this is coming up, but yeah, that's what Yusei would do. Yeah, that's why we all love him as a fandom. Like, what else can we say, pretty much, right? But Konami just says, like, hey, but even though Hughes crushed all of those China-related problems, Yuma probably also did well on that section too, right? As Usami sort of, like, looks through all of her databases, like, oh, hey, look at this. Not as good as Husei, but Yuma definitely did it decent headway, right? And she's just looking and saying, like, maybe it also took him a while to realize there's a whole section on Tryon engineering, as we really just get a good look at all of the Utagawa's squad breakdowns for all of the points. And we see that Kuga has made 170 points and plus 18 from the evaluation of A rankers, pretty much, right? And we pretty much usually like, hey, I bet Yuma will do even better points-wise tomorrow, right? And Konami's looking at all this, she's like, hey, and all of the A rankers gave, like, Yuma some serious pointage here, right? And we see that Usami's like, yeah, and they gave him even more yesterday, pretty much, right? And just looking through all this various stuff, she's like, hey, he was central to the squad's battle sim operation, and he's definitely been making concentrated effort to help out Shiki whenever possible, pretty much, right? And Konami's like, hey, I bet Nasu would cry tears of joy seeing that, pretty much, right? And Usami just says, like, yeah. And by the time they reach the combat phase, Utagawa Squad 1 have better had something to do to pretty much calm Shiki's nerves. And hey, it looks to me like Yuma is making strides towards that. As we cut over now to Utagawa's Squad 1, where presumably a few of the other characters, of course, Utagawa and Urashima, are taking care of, like, putting the door together. And of course, this leaves Yuma, Kotaro, and Shiki all pretty much sitting down with each other at the table, pretty much. Of course, the two 14-year-old boys with the 16-year-old girl to pretty much calm her nerves, pretty much, right? As Yuma just is like, hey, I mean, I'm not really sure if it's really my place to ask you, but Sayoko, do you have a hard time talking to boys? Yuma, read the room, my man. But Shiki's like, hey, I mean, like, why do you want to know all that? And of course, her voice is, like, really breaking up here in a moment. She's like, hey, I mean, I can hardly remember not having a time being this way. Like, the way I am, I mean, like, I'm not really sure if there's an exact reason why. She pauses for a moment. She's like, well, actually, maybe it all did start with that, pretty much. But, like, then I have to explain all the other things and all that other stuff. And he was like, hey, Shiki, I'm really sorry. Like, don't sweat it. I'm not trying to dredge anything up from your past or anything. As we see that Shiki sort of, like, looks down, realizing that she has to do something about herself. As instead of speaking out loud, she sort of switches over to the trigger communication through the brain, pretty much, right? As we see that she pretty much just patches in Kotaro and Yuma and says, like, hey, do you two believe in astral projection? And both Kotaro and Yuma are like, astral projection? And that's where we end chapter number 250 of World Trigger. Of course, we also got 251 this month, so we're just going to go ahead and, like, segue over and just move into it, like, how I always do. Granted, these videos would probably do better if I, like, split these guys up, but this is a really cool review. I want to talk about it all in one video, you know? But as we open up chapter number 251, again, this chapter is titled Sayoko Shiki. Hey, it's a chapter completely focused on her, right? But as we pretty much open up the chapter, it's, like, immediately where we left off, with Kotaro being like, hey, like, by astral projection, do you mean, like, your soul leaving your body? And Shiki's like, well, I'm not entirely, like, sure it's my entire soul or anything, but, hey, just, like, take a look at this. As we see that Shiki pretty much, like, just sits there, holds up her right hand, and puts it over her right eye. And just is like, hey, well, first, if I cover one eye like this, and then suddenly I'm seeing out of my right eye, and that's the only part of me I'm moving around. And we see that Kotaro's like, what, like, just your eye? That's a little, like, weird. As pretty much she just says, like, hey, the way I picture it is that a ghostly form of me with only my right eye has my left body and can maneuver around in it however I want. And she's like, hey, like, do you two know what that sensation feels like? And Yuma's like, no. We don't know in the least, pretty much, right? And we see that she's like, hey, right now Utagawa is cutting some carrots, and Urashima is stir-frying some chicken. As Kotaro pretty much gets up and goes to check out what, of course, Utagawa and Urashima are doing in the kitchen, I guess that by this point they already got the pantry door open. Of course, like last time we saw, they were in the camp of break it down, or maybe we won't break it down, if we can fix it. So we don't know which one they actually sat down and did. But we see that the two of them are currently cooking, and Kotaro's like, oh yeah, I mean, she's completely right. That's what both Urashima and the other guy's face, Utagawa, are currently doing pretty much, right? And Kotaro's like, hey, so, like, can your ghost, like, move around, like, through walls and all of that stuff? And Shiki's like, no, it's definitely not that useful. I mean, it can't, like, pass through walls or fly up into the air, and plus, it really does move quite slowly and can't affect other objects. And we just see an image of, like, hey, it can't go through walls, it can't pick up a book or anything like that. And Shiki also sort of, like, says, and also, it can't squeeze through any space narrower than my head already. And she's like, hey, I guess this really does, like, sound all so crazy to believe, and, like, you guys definitely must doubt me, right? But of course, Yuma's here. Yuma has a side effect. He can tell whether or not she is lying. And he's like, hey, no, I believe you. Like, you're not lying, Sakyo. And she's like, oh, like, what do you mean? And Yuma just was like, hey, but what your astral projection got to do with the other thing, pretty much, right? And Shiki just says, like, oh, well, what happened was I told my classmates in elementary school about a ghost. And, well, they called me a big liar. As we then go into a flashback of a young Shiki, of course, in elementary school, so this is probably, like, what, 9 or so years ago for her? Between, like, probably 9 and, what was that, like, maybe 9 to 7 years ago for her. And at first I was really cut off, like, man, like, young Shiki looks so weird, like, what is all of this? And eventually I realized what the issue is. She just is drawn with no nose whatsoever. If she had a nose, Ashihara didn't draw it. Honestly, it's a bit of a nice and funny look to where, like, this character who's so obviously a World Trigger character, like, we don't see any teeth or anything like that. It's just like, hey, talking here in the moment, and, like, all the other characters look perfectly fine. Like, we see a few faces of, like, some female and a male teacher, of course, as we'll be getting to, and, like, a bunch of our faces, none of them have noses, or all of them have noses. Shiki just doesn't have one for some reason, right? As the whole idea here is Shiki is pretty much standing up to the class, just like, hey, no, I'm not lying. Like, I can really see stuff in that really weird way. And of course, all for other classmates was like, no, like, you're totally lying. Like, no ways that's even possible. And she's like, no, it's definitely true. And they're all like, hey, don't even joke about all of this. As we see the teacher of this class, she's like, hey, here's an idea, Shiki. Do you see that big apartment building over there in the distance? He points out the window of where the school is, like, hey, I live on the first floor of that building. Like, hey, here's what you will do, Shiki. Tonight, around 8 o'clock, make your ghost travel from your house and spy on me at my house. And the question is, what am I having for dinner? And like, hey, tomorrow we'll find out if you're telling the truth to everybody, right? And Shiki's like, okay then, and we see that pretty much everybody's like, okay, well, she's sticking to her story, and she's like, hey, it's impossible, I'm telling you, like, I can do it, pretty much, right? Well, we now cut over to 8 p.m. this night, when, of course, it seems like this teacher's at home, and we see that he's got a girl with him at the house, pretty much, right? Presumably, his wife, as we just see that he goes over and takes a picture of all of his food, pretty much. And this girl just is like, hey, like, why are you taking a pic of your food, pretty much, right? And he's like, hey, I'm just playing along with some of the kids at my school, pretty much. And like, hey, this will just serve as some proof, pretty much, right? She's like, hey, well, kids really do say the darndest things. So, of course, it seems like he had just explained all of this. And like, hey, it's just they're like zany tall tales. It can be very cute and endearing sometimes, pretty much, right? And he's like, hey, tomorrow I'll find her ahead of time at school, and like, I'll just make it seem like she was telling the truth to the entire class, like, not trying to hurt her feelings. Honestly, a really admirable thing that this teacher's doing to, like, make sure that Shiki doesn't get bullied any further or anything like that, pretty much, right? Well, we see the next morning at school. We see that, of course, he has called Shiki into the office where all the other teachers are, and just like, hey, last night, just letting you know what I had for dinner. What I had for dinner was, and of course, Shiki just like, hey, you had spaghetti. Like, I know it. And of course, he's taken aback about like this, like, oh, like, that's interesting. And one of the teachers behind him is just like, oh, hey, what's all this about? And we see that the teacher's like, hey, don't really worry about it. It's like, hey, well, I mean, you've really got a talent for good guesses, Shiki. Like, hey, do you know what kind of spaghetti it was? And we see she's like, oh, yeah, it was spaghetti with tomato sauce. And you ate it with your wife, the lady with long hair. And we see this teacher's like, oh, as we see, all of the other teachers in the background just immediately look at this situation, and he's just like, oh. As we then cut back to the present, where of course Shiki is sitting down with Kotaro and Yuma, and she's like, yeah, and I had no way of knowing it at the time, but that woman was in fact not my teacher's wife. His wife was very pregnant, and she was staying back home with her parents. And we see that both Yuma and Kotaro are like, oh boy, that's a story we didn't need to hear, pretty much. But pretty much, Shiki just is like, yeah, I'll never forget the look that teacher gave me. And we see that he's like, hey, you must never tell one of those stories of all those silly lies like this again, right? And we see that this almost sort of like scared Shiki so bad to where she didn't want to come out and do all this again. And she just says like, hey, anyway, not long after the fact, there ended up being, he ended up being transferred to another school, and ever since then, whenever I talk, I find myself worrying that I'll say something weird or wrong. I think it's especially hard to have time with men who are older than me, pretty much, right? And it just says, like, hey, and I fully realize this entire story is probably coming off as, like, a little bizarre or something like that. So I was like, hey, but, like, Shiki, you clearly didn't do anything wrong. Like, you just got dragged into somebody's shitty scandal, pretty much. The 14-year-old does not say the word shitty. That is what Glowplasma threw in there. I am sorry. But that's what it is. It's a bad, stupid scandal. Shiki deserves way better than all of that, right? And Yuma sort of like nods his head and agrees, and like, yeah, for sure. And plus, your side effect sounds super handy. And Kotaro's like, what do you mean? Like, what side effect? And we see like, hey, do you mean like the things that like that Kikuchihara and Murakami can do? And of course, like, yes, that's the same type of side effect he's talking about. Yuma's like, yes, it is. Even among side effects, this sounds like a really rare one. And what's probably going on is that you're extending a thin strand of Trion along the ground, and the tip of it can detect light without any external equipment whatsoever. As Yuma's like, hey, have you told anybody else about any of this at all? And we see that Sayoko's like, no, it's just my squad. I'm honestly really worried that other people will just like sit down and think it's actually creepy. And Yuma's like, hey, but if like I were you, I'd actually just like sit down and inform all of the big bosses and board. Like, they'd honestly probably really appreciate the new options it would give them. And it can totally come in handy on defense missions, right? And at this point, Utagawa sort of like sticks his head back, just like, hey guys, dinner's almost ready, like clear the table. And both Yuma and Kotaro are like, all right, sure thing. And we see that they move out and do all of that stuff. And I really love how this is portrayed, because I feel like there's probably a few World Trigger fans who are like, oh, like, didn't she just, like, tell all the management and everybody about this? But no, she's in the Trigger Talk function right now, so, like, she is not actively broadcasting this to everybody, just to Yuma and Kotaro, and they're having this conversation really in this, like, small enclosed space. As we see that pretty much Kotaro gets up from the table, and Shiki is just sort of, like, standing here and stands up and just thinks about it all. She's like, oh, and she remembers back whenever she apparently first told Akane, of course, one of the members of her squad, about this. And Akane just like, whoa, like, that's totally, like, the coolest thing of all time. Like, I want to astral project too. And we see that Sheiks like, no, like, don't tell anybody about this, Akane, pretty much. And she's like, hey, well, maybe I should. As we see, this is where we end off this moment with Utagawa's Squad 1. As we now cut over to Kodera's Squad 6, where we see Okudera and also Kodera pretty much tinkering with all of the various stuff. And we see that Kodera's like, alright, all done, and we see that he, like, lifts up his hand, touches the door, and it swings open, and Okudera's like, oh, hey, look at that, like, it worked like a charm, pretty much, right? And we see that Kodera and Okudera walk back. I've never realized how we have both Okudera and Kodera in that squad. That is actually, like, very, very funny, pretty much. I mean, I understand, like, the way it's spelled. It's like Kodera, and it's Okudera. But it really doesn't help when it's Kodera, Okudera. It's just honestly a little bit funny, right? But we see that they walk back into the main room, like, hey guys, we figured it out, pretty cool. And all of the other people, like Miura, Kitora, and Rokuda, I'm trying to remember all of these characters' names, I have a job to do here, are like, oh hey, that's awesome work, like, good job guys! But pretty much Kodera just is like, hey, if nothing else, we avoided the worst case scenario, right? And we see that Miura's like, yeah, I mean, if we would have run dry on Shrine, we've been unable to submit any of the assignments we've been working on and finished early, pretty much. And Kodera's like, hey, really realizing that the malfunction was just, in fact, another special assignment, allowed us to stay calm and finish the job, pretty much. And Kodera's like, hey, and honestly, in a sense, I guess we sort of have Suwa to thank at the end of the day. And Kodera's like, yeah, I guess so. I guess this would also make Okudera or Kodera Squad 6 like in debt twice to Suwa. Of course, whenever Suwa just said like, hey, or gave all the information on the points after the first day of the battle sims. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, they're a little bit in debt to Suwa Squad 7. Us in the fandom aren't complaining though, right? But Kitora just pretty much, like, goes up, like, hey, come on, Rakuda, I'm your, sous chef today, like, let's go up and get all the time to make dinner, pretty much, right? And pretty much the rest of them are like, hey, thanks for making food, pretty much, right? But we pretty much sit down and look at what Kodera is looking at on his computer. It's like, hey, so there's going to be no more matches between any of the squads tomorrow, and what's left of this competition will be decided on our ability to get all of our schoolwork done, plus our battle tactics, pretty much, right? As we see that he's just sitting here taking long, he's like, hey, but I guess there is just one small factor I'm uneasy about. As we don't really understand what this is that Okudera is really, or not Okudera, what Kodera is sitting here thinking about, right? But at this point, we then cut over to Mizukami's Squad 9. He's like, alright guys, the door's all fixed back there. Or that's what Arafune says as he's pretty much walking through and like, alright guys, all fixed, got it taken care of. And all the squad's like, hey, impressive, good job. And the whole idea is like, yes, these are the smart people. Any one of them would have probably been able to do it, right? But Kashio just is like, hey, with only one day left in the sealed environment phase, we have over a 600-point lead over second place, and over a 1,000-point lead in the one in third place, pretty much, right? And he's like, hey, bearing really any completely unforeseen twists, like, it seems like we really have this operation in the bag, pretty much. And also, like, no more battle sims as tomorrow. Arafune says, like, hey, and still Wakamura Squad did really close the gap by almost 800 points today. They're doing really, really good, right? As Troy is like, hey, and you're also right about that, I wonder how they secured all of those points, pretty much, right? As we see that as we see that Kashio just says like, hey, and there really doesn't seem to be any funny business with any of the sim scores or anything like that, so honestly, by process of elimination, I guess that just like really leaves all of the delegated assignments, which of course aren't the ones that need to be completed, but it's like, hey, as many as you can get done, better on you, pretty much, right? As we see that he's just like, hey, and what if even like only once a day after daily labor hours are over, they're going to find time to do more work on all the assignments, like maybe they stockpiled completed material and are handing in a whole bunch today, pretty much, right? And Troy just says like, hey, but like how, considering we can only get a view of those assignments during the designated labor hours, right? And Mizukami was like, hey, I mean, there's really, like, nothing to it. Like, you could just, like, take pictures of, like, your screenshots of all the homework or something like that. And we see that Teruya has not come to this realization. It's like, oh, boy, like, I didn't even think about it. Like, that must be it, right? But Mizukami just is like, hey, but even still, as the squad in first, we have, like, over a 1,600-point lead over Wakamura Squad, and no matter how big of a heap of homework they've been saving up, there isn't no way they'll be able to double the output that they pretty much produced today, right? And Kashi's like, yeah, that really does make sense. Teruya is like, yeah, and we can also devote our full attention to all of the delegated assignments tomorrow. As we see that Mizukami's like, no, I mean, Wakamura Squad isn't on my radar, and, well, not them anyhow. And we pretty much see that dinner is now ready, and as they're all sitting down and eating, they're like, wow, this looks absolutely amazing. Teruya uses the wording of scrumptious. Okay, Akashi says like, hey, thanks for cooking, right? But as Mizukami is just sitting here taking all of this in, we see that the operator Kon just says like, hey, what's wrong? It's like, is everything okay, Mizukami? And it's like, is there something like you can't stand into food or something? And it's like, oh, no. Hey, I actually have a proposal for y'all that I'm sort of mulling over. And that's where we end this chapter of World Trigger and the 2 chapters that we got for April of 2025. And of course, the most World Trigger moment of somebody being like, hey guys, I've got a proposition. And that's where we end this chapter of World Trigger. It's sort of just like I said, the most World Trigger thing that World Trigger can be doing right now. But, like, overall, like I mentioned earlier, I thought these were some absolutely amazing chapters. I really love this special assignment of, like, actually seeing how these characters figure out a problem. Because this isn't something that we've legitimately seen much of in this arc. It's been a lot of, okay, solve this question, put your mind to work, and none of it's truly been, okay, guys, you have this physical problem that could come up on an away mission as in the troop. And I love how Taichi earlier in chapter number 250 just is like, hey, we could just break down the door, because, like, this may be one of those things, like, hey, if one of the engineers dies in battle, we still need to be able to, like, function this ship on our own and not die on our way getting back to, of course, Earth from after Kotor or wherever they're going in the neighborhood, right? So it's one of these bigger ideas of, like, well, would you believe that? Like, that's such brilliant thinking from Taichi, and a person who we don't normally associate with brilliant thinking. I think it's pretty cool, right? But of course, this whole idea of, like, seeing how they take a look at it, Yuba and Arifune really taking pictures, learning that lesson, showing it there in the moment, and of course, just seeing how all these characters sort of react. I do find the moment of Shiki sort of bringing up her entire thing a little bit weirdly placed in the chapter, as it's the whole idea of, like, Konami and Usami talking, and it's like, hey, all of a sudden, how are all of them doing? And it's like, yes, we need to talk about Shiki's thing at some point, and I understand the 6th day she's been around Kotaro and Yuma long enough to where it's not really that big of a deal that she's telling them at this point. Even if it is a little hard on her character, it does make a little bit of sense at the end of the day. And of course, moving into her whole, like, backstory of the whole idea of, like, it's actually just, like, 5 pages where we see all of her stuff going on, but it's honestly really heavy, where she just, like, goes to her teacher, says all of this, the teacher's like, oh no, I was with a woman who wasn't my life, like, don't lie about all of this, and how badly this really messed up Shiki. It's honestly a very messed up thing to do, and, like, yeah, he's not a great person for doing that pretty much, right? But of course, I also like how he was sort of a little bit admirable, going and being like, yeah, I'm going to pretty much tell her beforehand so the students don't bully her, and then he ends up being the biggest bully because, like, she's telling the truth and he doesn't like that she was, with the whole idea of, like, yeah, you're being unfaithful to your wife. You're a jackass. This is your problem, not anybody else's. And of course, moving into all of that moment and just seeing how Kodera Squad and all of them are pretty much dealing with all of this. Legitimately, the second half of 251 was probably my least favorite section of all of these chapters, but it really does serve into whatever we get next month, which I now know that we have had chapters in both May and June of 2025, and honestly, I don't remember what Mizukami was talking about here, so I guess we'll figure that out in the next World Trigger chapter review. I'm going to say I plan to have this video out sooner than the delay between the chapter number 249 review and this review, being that I am behind 2 World Trigger videos after this one gets posted. I'm going to do my best to get it up decently soon, put it out. Hopefully I have an idea for a schedule I want to do for that, but I'm not going to say anything on a video and then have that be terribly wrong here in a few weeks or months or however it sort of works out, but I just absolutely love talking about World Trigger. I love this series by Daisuke Ashihara. I love everything that he puts into it. All of the planning, like, this is something that he's had planned for Shiki for a very long time. I mean, like I said, in the very beginning of this video, almost 50 minutes ago, I mentioned that with the whole beginning of the volume 19 stuff of just a question. Are there any operators with side effects? Ashihara being like, yes, there are. I'm hoping to show that off one of these days. And this is the time that we finally get that. Just really awesome to see, and I love how Ashihara writes his manga. But hey, with all of that out of the way, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on World Trigger, chapter number 250 and chapter number 251. Of course, I've been talking about World Trigger since chapter number 227, so if you want to hear any of my thoughts, there's a series of videos on the channel. There will be a playlist link down in the description box of this video, along on the end card of this video also, so go check out all of that there, and hey, if you enjoyed this video, I talk about plenty of other anime and manga related content here on the Glowplasma YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube at Glowplasma, or just go and click on my name in the bottom of this video and check out all my content there. You don't necessarily have to like it, and you don't need to enjoy it whatsoever, but I really hope you may actually do, because I enjoy making it, and hey, World Trigger, you know what I'm saying? But I'll catch you guys next time for World Trigger chapter number 252, presumably titled The Away Mission Test Part 43. Again, we don't know. World Trigger's been acting weird recently. We've gotten like things about Rokuro Wakamura and Sayoko Shiki, so who knows? Next chapter could be titled something like World Trigger chapter number 252, Yumakuga part 457. I'm now going and checking the chapter real quick, and if my computer will load, that'd help. How long do I need to stall for, pretty much? Yes, next chapter is titled The Away Mission Test Part 43, but who knows, we could have gotten weird and wacky there, but either way, I'll catch you guys next time for World Trigger chapter number 252. Again, this has been the chapter number 250 and 251 video. Of course, the chapters for April of 2025. And hey, I'll catch you guys next time. This will be Glowplasma 231. Hey, I want to see more of Inukai. Signing out. See you guys later.